Today we are joined by a leading legal name in the Australian listed property market who transitioned to head the risk function of a leading institution less than 1 year before the pandemic struck. If you're ready for a masterclass in career transition and crisis management, listen on. This is episode 13 of the Field Trip podcast. Let's go. Jacqui O'Dea is the Chief Risk Officer of GPT Group, one of Australia's largest diversified property groups with $24.5 billion of retail, office and logistics property under management. Jacqui transitioned from Deputy General Counsel to CRO in March 2019, giving her about 10 months to prepare for arguably the biggest risk challenge of a generation. We hear how Jacqui skilled up quickly, gathered support from within and outside the organisation, and has helped this major landlord navigate the challenge that is the pandemic. Key observations for me from this discussion are how well Jacqui managed a transition to a new discipline at a senior level, how well GPT has supported her in doing so, and how she has used her newness to the role as an advantage. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Jacqui O'Dea, you are the Chief Risk Officer at the GPT Group. Welcome to the Field Trip podcast.
Thanks very much, Alistair. Pleased to be here.
Great. Where does this podcast find you today? That's a very corporate-looking backdrop that I can see.
It is. So I am on level 52 of the MLC Centre as we speak, and that's where GPT's Sydney head office is. We have offices in Melbourne, in Brisbane, in Sydney, and we also have a shopping centre up in the Northern Territory. So we're across the country, but most of our people are based here in the MLC.
And what's the... to what extent are people back in the office? I don't want to get too much in discussion about sort of general pandemic-related market issues, but as you're in the office, how many of your co-workers are back? What's the city in Sydney feel like at the moment? Is it getting its vibe back?
It is, slowly though. I think Christmas is helping it along in that there are a lot more people coming into the city now and moving about at lunchtime, shopping and what have you, but it's a very slow process. At the moment, in terms of GPT, our people have been back in the office since the 9th of June, in large part. We came back initially on a team-based basis, and we've now scrapped the teams because things are feeling reasonably more certain here, as you know, and that the low level of community transmission has made us all feel a bit more comfortable being in here. We have a limited number of desks, so where previously we had about 270 desks available for people, we've got about 170 at the moment. And on average, we've got about between 100 and 140 people who make it into the office most days, although it's very obvious to us now that Mondays and Fridays are days when people prefer to work from home. So we have huge demand for desks. Yes, huge demand for desks on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, not so much on Monday and Friday.
Right, so I've got you on a quiet day today then.
Relatively, yes.
It's being a Monday. Other than just having a chat with somebody who's in a key role in a key market player being GPT, you've made a very interestingly timed transition from a senior legal role into the Chief Risk Officer role at GPT Group, starting almost immediately prior to the pandemic. I really want to unpack that today. That's going to be the focus of discussion in a lot of respects. But just, in a short answer, how has that experience been for you?
It's been a big year. It's actually been a year of enormous growth, which was always going to be anyway, because the role change was significant. So I went from being GPT's Deputy General Counsel to being our Chief Risk Officer. And in some senses, I guess that was a risk that GPT took, and I'm very pleased they did. But there was always going to be a big learning curve for me because it's very different to the role I had previously, albeit I had been with the company for a long time, so I knew and understood the organisation before I changed roles, which helped a lot. And I had done various different, more commercial things whilst I had been in the legal team. So I'd been company secretary for our wholesale funds business. I had sat as a director on some of our subsidiary boards. So I covered a fair bit of ground, and I thought that I thought I knew lots, but I didn't know anything. So it's been huge, and yeah, I think I don't regret it at all. I have actually loved it, oddly enough. In the toughest times, it's been a bit of a thrill in a funny kind of a way to be part of it all, because there really was a crisis and we really did have to respond on many different levels, and it was very challenging, but at the same time, huge opportunity for growth and learning. And I've actually had an insight into the workings of GPT and working with my senior colleagues on the leadership team in a way that it would have taken me years, I think, otherwise to get this level of understanding. So it's accelerated my learning enormously.
Yes, well, that's the key word of the pandemic, isn't it? But
it is.
Look, I mean, the fact that you're speaking so positively about it, and I can see you speaking about it with a smile, must mean that you've risen to the occasion, because it's. So I think that's a fantastic time to do it, but clearly you're really resonating with that role well. Tell us about what the risk function looks like at GPT in terms of what are you responsible for, and perhaps what does your immediate team look like, and how do you then channel into different parts of the business?
So I've got 5 direct reports, and my role is a little bit broader, I think, than some of the other CRO roles around town from what I can gather. So I look after risk and audit, which should come as no surprise. I also oversee GPT's insurances, which I understand is a fairly common part of a risk role. I have health and safety reporting into me. I also look after sustainability and procurement. And it's those 2 extras, I think, which make me a little bit different at GPT, the structure here to some other organisations. Sustainability in particular has been challenging and interesting for me. And as everyone would know, ESG is really having its time in the sun at the moment. Everybody wants to know about ESG and what GPT is doing in that space. And a lot of that is dealt with in my team or by my team. Governance, of course, has an overlap with legal, and so my background in legal and in governance generally, having been POSEC, as I mentioned, has been incredibly useful from that perspective. But yeah, it's a broad remit, so 5 direct reports, and each of them have people who report into them.
And what is, as you look around town, whether it be within real estate or more broadly, what is the typical career path into that CRO role? It's
interesting because when I first transitioned into this role, I spoke with Deloitte, and they have a sort of executive training program that they run for people coming into any of the C-suite roles. And so they had some good insight into what people's backgrounds are when they take on the CRO role and what training might be required. And I contacted them because I was very keen to develop my skills in this area. And one of the things I learned that there really is not the traditional career path to CRO. So there's not one definable path to getting here. And increasingly people are coming from a legal background. That didn't happen very often, say 10 years ago, but over that period of time, more and more CROs have some kind of legal background. A lot come from consulting firms. So a lot of them have come through the EY and Deloitte, PwCs of this world.
And what, with their genesis in finance? I mean, with my sort of narrow perspective, I've seen people come through a finance function ultimately to find their way into risk roles.
Yes, finance sometimes. Just thinking of my predecessor, she was at Macquarie Bank in a risk role before she joined GPT and has now moved on to enterprise risk management at CBA. Some of them have come from that kind of banking sort of background and have had degrees in economics, accounting, finance. But yeah, law is increasingly another pathway into it. But there is no one well-trodden path to risk management.
I mean, you've just spoken about all the different areas of responsibility. There's no one core discipline that naturally covers all of them.
No, there isn't. And risk itself as a discipline is, look, it's been around forever, and every organisation has always been conscious of its risk. But the way it is,
not like it has this year.
no,
I'm sure.
that's right. The way that it's sort of been formalised, I think, in recent years and is now managed much more closely. There are tools out in the marketplace at IT that is set up to assist people with risk and compliance management. So it's got a structure now that perhaps it didn't have in the past.
And so which of those areas have you found the most challenging to grapple with, or where you've had to put the most work in to get up to speed?
Audit, probably, because audit is an area like legal, I guess, where people come with very clear backgrounds, actually, and this notion of the role of internal audit and how that fits with your external auditors, what you're there to do, the importance of maintaining independence as an internal auditor, and how you actually go about doing that, and keeping those lines of responsibility really, really clear. Understanding what used to be called the 3 lines of defence model. It's now just the 3 lines model, although we've added of accountability here at GPT. But understanding how that works and how you go about undertaking different types of audits. So audit was an area where there really is a body of knowledge, a well-established body of knowledge that I needed to come to grips with. And I thought that I understood how audit worked, but I realised once I took on this role that I at a very high level, sure, most of us have a concept of what it might, we can guess what might be involved in an internal audit and how it goes about, but to actually pull together a really meaningful audit report, to actually undertake a really meaningful audit that adds value to the organisation and isn't just stepping through the motions, and to report the information in a way that is easily understood with useful recommendations. There's a real skill to that, and we've got a great team here at GPT, and they've been very patient with me and helped me develop, my skills in that area and learn. And that's another thing that I think I've grappled with, is managing people who know more than you, a lot more in some cases, about the different areas that I now oversee.
Well, it's a healthy environment to be in, isn't it?
It is.
Surrounded by people that know more than you. That's always been my view of the world. So how has, you spoke about the challenge of the internal audit function. How has your time at GPT helped and hindered you in that respect? Because I suppose you would know a lot of people, so you'd have a good understanding of the business, but you're also there to ask the hard questions. Yep. I imagine that is one of the ongoing challenges of that internal risk function, to get access and openness and a candid response from people that you're talking to, but also being able to remain impartial. How have you walked that line?
Well, actually, that's where coming from the legal background, that's actually been very helpful to me, because there were many occasions in my previous role as Deputy General Counsel where I had to sort of take a hard line.
Crack the whip.
And tell people, this is, you can't do this, and these are the reasons you can't do it, et cetera, et cetera. So I was comfortable and remain comfortable doing that in here. I think also my elevation, here I use that word, to GPT's leadership team has assisted me in that, to tell the truth. It's been interesting because having, I guess, that credential behind me when I'm asking for information or when I'm saying that something needs to change, then generally I get a pretty good response actually now. So it's good, but it is tough. I have worked with a lot of my colleagues for many, many years, and I know them well, very well. So I can also guess where they're hiding. I know where all the bodies are buried. So
you just need to tilt your head in a certain way.
Really? Do you really
out.
mean that? That's right. So it's both on occasion, but no, it seems to be. I think being professional in your approach is always very helpful. It's maintained a good degree of professionalism, I like to think, in my work in here, and that's been very useful.
It's a really interesting thing, and there are a few comments you made in there have me think about you're talking about the difference in perception of you, or the way people interact with you when you move from a very senior role into a C-suite role, which was interesting. As we were discussing just before we pressed record before, I was wanting to get an understanding, albeit a brief understanding, about what the governance structure or the corporate structure at GPT Group looked like from the perspective of exactly what you're talking about there. So, basically what in broad brush does the structure look like? And then how does the management team interact with those decision-making bodies? And then interestingly, I wanted to dig into how that's differed from the role you were in to what you were just, to what you're in now. So what does governance look like at GPT?
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously it all begins with the board. So if we take it from the top, so we have the way GPT is structured is that we have a headstock, so that the listed entity, GPT entity, but then we also have a wholesale funds business. So we've got two wholesale funds, which GPT has a stake in, around about 25% in each of our GPT Wholesale Shopping Centre Fund and our GPT Wholesale Office Fund. Those two funds have a responsible entity, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of our headstock of GPT. And so there is a board that sits over those two funds and is the board of the responsible entity. So we've got effectively two boards that I interact with regularly. And one is the GPT headstock board and the other is the GPT funds management board. And so GPT, we own, we develop, and we manage property, and we also have the funds management business. That's our structure. So within our main board, we also have a number of board committees, and there are two in particular that I interact with now, and that is the Sustainability and Risk Committee and then the Audit Committee. So I report, all members of my team report directly into both of those committees, and I have a lot of liaising with the chair of each of those committees. And in fact, as far as the Audit Committee is concerned, I have a dotted line report through to the chair of our Audit Committee. So I report also to our Chief Operating Officer and also to our Audit Committee chair. And then one step down from the board structure and the board committee structure sits our LT, so our leadership team. And at the moment, we've got 8 members on our leadership team, soon to have a 9th. We're filling a role of the head of people and performance, and a new person will join us in February in that role. But at the moment, there are 8 of us, and each of us are responsible for obviously different areas of business. So we've got our COO, our CEO, myself, our CFO, and then we've got the head of our retail business who sits on our leadership team, the head of our office and logistics business, and the head of our funds management business. So it reflects very clearly the business units within GPT. And then probably then the next layer down is our investment committee, which I also sit on. So every investment decision that we make at GPT with a value of over $5 million is approved by our investment committee. And so everything we do. And that investment committee has a due diligence committee, which I chair. And the role of the due diligence committee is once the IC has actually approved an investment, so we'll go ahead with it, then the due diligence committee oversees all of the DD that's done in relation to that acquisition, divestment, development, whatever it might be. And then only once all the members of the DDC have signed off do we actually go ahead with that. So and all of that happens in accordance with limits of authority and all sorts of other structures that sit in place. But those are probably our key governance structures. So the board committees, the leadership team, the investment committee, and then the due diligence committee that goes with that.
And how has your so you're sitting in the leadership team, and you said you're on the investment committee as well. So how do you find being part of the discussions on investments, which I imagine is not something you had exposure to in a legal role?
No, I didn't have a lot of exposure to it, albeit I had sat on the board of actually a government, totally unrelated entity to GPT, a board of a government entity for the last 5 years, which looked after caravan parks. So it was a Crown Holiday Parks Trust, and we oversaw 47 different camping and caravan parks across New South Wales. And
important function.
Yeah, well, actually, it was amazing, and I loved it, really loved it. And tell you, some of that Crown land is some of the most magnificent land in New South Wales. Just beachfront land that no one can touch because it's Crown land. So often in the very best locations, and so it was great fun going to visit them all. But that gave me fantastic insight. That experience was incredibly useful in, I think, actually helping me have the confidence to take on this role and develop my financial skills, and particularly my investment analysis skills. Prior to that, I had also, as I mentioned earlier, sat as a director on some of GPT's subsidiary boards. So one in particular was Voyages, when we owned the Voyages portfolio of hotels and tourism assets, and a lot of islands actually up your way in Queensland. So that was a great experience as well, because that taught me a lot about basic balance sheet, profit and loss analysis. And of course, I had sat on every available occasion. I had attended courses and tried to further my education in that area. And I did actually major in finance within a commerce degree at uni. That was about 6,000 years ago now, so it probably counts for absolutely nothing. But
Same.
I did have some level of familiarity, not very much. So it's been, as I said, massive learning curve. I have loved being part of the investment committee, really enjoy it. I have had a mentor, so somebody who was the head of our capital transactions business unit here at GPT, who left not long before I became CRO. And he has been a wonderful sounding board for me, and I've been able to ask him a lot of very stupid questions, and he has been endlessly patient. So I have built up my skills, but as you say, it wasn't an area that was something that I had worked regularly in for a long period of time before I took on this role.
No, I imagine that would have been, if I can just imagine putting myself in your shoes, that would have been the most exciting yet challenging aspect of the role.
Yes.
I think, you're really having input on the core business and core business decisions. And I think a lot of, most in-house lawyers would probably say that they feel like they rarely get to sit in a chair and feel like that. So that's excellent. Just shifting track slightly, when comparing your prior role as Deputy General Counsel and your role now as Chief Risk Officer, what does your day look like in comparison? What are the nature of the tasks? Not specifically what tasks are they, but what does your day look like? Is it more desk bound? Is it more meeting bound? Is it a different type of thinking and engagement that you do? How do they differ?
A lot more meetings. So I'm rarely at my desk, and actually for a time that worried me a lot. And I was thinking, well, am I actually really contributing here? Am I doing, it felt like I wasn't sitting down and staring at a contract for hours and really feeling like I was doing a piece of work because I was drafting something or I was producing something. And so that for me was a real shift. And I had to get used to the notion that I was adding value, but in a different way. So I'm coming to a meeting, and I had to come to that meeting prepared. I have to come to that meeting ready to contribute and ready to make decisions, actually, to really make calls on the hop. And that's what I find is now expected of me. And when I'm attending meetings, people want my input, and they want to be assisted in, given a direction with whatever it is we're there to talk about. And so that's...
How do you find that responsibility? Again, I'm just projecting my own insecurities here, but I think as a lawyer, there's always that. I think that the legal mindset is one of constantly looking for things that are wrong.
That's right.
I think that's inherent in the thought process.
Yeah.
And so part and parcel of that, certainly for me, is always going back and revisiting things and being worried about tripping over things. You're now in a role where you're expected to consistently make significant decisions on the fly. Did you suffer from
Absolutely
from that thing before, and how have you been able to manage that in doing what you're doing now?
I think one of the things that I kept wanting to do initially was to take it away and just do a little more research and understand a little bit more before I could then, feel comfortable saying, yes, okay, we can go ahead with that. And I have had to overcome that. because you don't have the time or the luxury of being able to do that all the time. And I have perfectionist tendencies, as I've been told all my career. So that 80-20 rule I really had to work on. I would like to know everything about everything before I make a decision about it. And that's not helpful, actually. And so I have had to learn to move quickly and to trust myself. And actually, the thing that has helped me the most is just getting on and doing it and finding that the world hasn't actually fallen apart, and that most of the time my judgment is good, and I have learned to trust my experience a lot more than I was doing in legal. You know, in legal, you really do need to, you got to check the act, you got to make sure that you've got the right year, the right date, the right word. And you do actually have to be bang on correct most of the time. Although there's obviously shades of grey in legal too, and lots of scope for judgment there as well. But in this role, I've moved into a zone now, and perhaps it's the seniority as well, where most things rely on judgment. There are a judgment backed by good information, judgment backed by knowledge and experience, and that's what gives you that good judgment, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yep.
But yeah, you just have to kind of trust yourself every now and then and go, yeah, just let's go. And I made a call this morning, actually, which is still scaring me. But you know, we've done all the.
This is a free therapy session.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. I can tell you, but look, it's and it had to do with IT, and IT is not an area. In fact, from a risk perspective, cyber, the risk of ransom at the moment is really very, very high, and it's something we're constantly conscious of, and it is an area where I've had to do more work in that area to be able to understand the risk. I needed to understand some of the language. I needed to understand a bit more about the technology than I did, and that was actually when you asked before about the biggest learning curve, audit was certainly a big learning curve, but having to understand a lot of IT, it has also been a challenge for me.
Yeah, and there's so much, you know, having had to walk a similar path in quite a different context. There's so much there that is unknown and is not tangible. It's quite a different.
Yes.
It's conceptually very different to other things that you need to learn. So I hear you on that. I was interested, just as you were telling me all of that, whether you think if you tomorrow went back and sat in your old chair, whether you'd do things markedly or in a different way, having had the experience of the past 9 months.
I think the commercial insight that I have now would help me I would probably perform my role slightly differently, certainly with a much greater understanding of the end goal, perhaps than I did originally. It's funny, you think you know things and you think you're commercial, but I realise now that I probably wasn't as commercial as I believed I was. And I do think that, I've got a slightly different perspective on the role of lawyers and their contribution to these kinds of decisions. And I see now that it's just one part of the puzzle. It shouldn't be the driver. There are some circumstances where, yes, it should be when you're dealing with things that are, where you compliance issues, whatever, continuous disclosure, all that sort of stuff, where it is very important that legal can drive. But when it comes to whether or not you're going to acquire an asset, sell one, it is one small part of the puzzle, and there are a lot of other things at stake, and they all need to be weighed up. And there's no perfect answer a lot of the time. So you have to be able to think ahead and think about the broader impacts of every decision it is that you're making. So, yeah, I probably would perform it differently.
I imagine there's an interesting opportunity then for there to be a bit of a feedback loop coming from you back into the legal function to sort of share the things you've learned.
Yes. Some lawyers are more open to learning those things than others, though. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I think a lot of lawyers who do make the move into away from private practice and into a firm like GPT, a company like GPT, they're already of a mindset where their minds, they want that exposure. They want to be viewed as commercial, because that's the ultimate goal for it's the ultimate compliment. If you're an in-house lawyer, that you're a commercial in-house lawyer on top of being a really good lawyer, you're commercial. That's probably the highest praise they can give you in here. So yes,
well, I think that's true. Let's, if we can, just go back to the sort of early in your tenure when the pandemic was starting to become a thing, and not wanting to get into the specifics of what GPT did, but perhaps talking in more general terms, to the extent you're feeling comfortable to do that. When it started to become a thing, what was that environment like, and how did things come together, and what kind of things were immediately apparent as being number one priorities in dealing with the impact?
Health and safety. Health and safety was absolutely and remains absolutely our number one priority. So the health and safety of our staff first and foremost, and then obviously we deal with a lot of contractors. We've got tenants, we've got customers coming into retail shopping centres across Australia. Health and safety has been the key driver behind every decision we've made in how we've responded to COVID-19.
And can I just ask, how did you mobilise in that area, being new to the role and not having that skill set specifically, or that I'm sure you've had things to do with that area, but you haven't been a practitioner in that area before. How did you and the team mobilise with expertise to help you sort of meet those challenges?
It's interesting. GPT has an external advisor who we use to advise in relation to crisis management in particular. And we had so I pulled out our crisis management plan and our asset incident response guides, and I went straight to all the policy documents and said, right, what do we have here? What does it say? And this was in January we began this exercise. Actually in December. It was in December, this time last year. Amazing. And
And when did you start?
So I started in March in 2019. So what are we now? Coming into March. That's right. March 2019 was when I began in the role, and December was when really started.
Your feet were comfortably under the
I'd
desk.
had some exposure, and I knew, in fact, one of the things that I had been working on was our business continuity plan. So I was familiar with that set of documents, that set of policies. And we had It
wasn't a blowing the dust off.
No, no, it wasn't at all.
I'm imagining, this big old leather bound.
No, not at all. No, it was actually one of the first things I did when I came into the role, and I can't remember exactly why I focused on that, but I'm very pleased I did. We had an airborne contaminants plan in place, and what I did was took that, went back to our external consultant and said, this is maybe not an airborne contaminant. I don't think this is going to cover what we're heading towards here. And of course, at that stage, we didn't know it was a pandemic. And then the World Health Organization didn't call it a pandemic until the beginning of this year. So they waited some time before it was officially classed as a pandemic. But in any event, airborne contaminants wasn't going to be sufficient given what we thought we were facing. And we put together a pandemic response guide. And we did that in January. And we had that, we formed a committee and we met for the first time on the 3rd of February. And I think at that stage there were 6 cases in Australia. So it was pretty early days in the whole thing. And we basically started to pull together a roadmap as to how we were going to respond if this got really bad. And by that stage, February 2020, I was already sending emails to all of our staff in relation to travel. So people who had their own personal holidays overseas during this last year's Christmas break and where they'd been, and we were formulating some guidance around whether they could come back into the office or not, dependent on where they had holidayed. We were also asking people to advise us as to where they were heading off to. At that stage, DFAT had certain travel advisories out for different countries. Oh, I've just lost the lights in here. That comes of being part of the sustainability team. I'll flick them on again. It's all very environmentally friendly, and if you sit still for too long, the lights go out. So we were already...
The irony of that being your ultimate responsibility isn't lost on me, I must say.
That's right. So it's a good thing. I think we were already recognising, we recognised early, and we were already managing our staff in relation to travel and attendance in the office and potential risk, and it just built from there. And to tell you the truth, I mean, there was no handbook for it. Nobody knew. I had fortunately reached out to all of the other CROs very early on when I took on this role, and I invited them all to lunch actually about 3 weeks in, and created a little sort of committee, and so I was able to draw on them and their knowledge, and we got together and we worked. We had maybe once a week at the beginning, once every couple of weeks, we were on the phone as a team, and it was wonderful to share that knowledge within the property industry and all of the big players. So, we had Centre Group in Stockland, and everybody was there, Dexus, and we did it together in large part. And it was actually very liberating to be able to know that there was absolutely no downside. In fact, there was only upside in collaborating. And it was great.
I was hesitant to ask that question, actually, because every now and again when I'm having these sorts of discussions, I ask the extent to which there's collaboration. Some people are open and some people are closed there. But in this case, one, I'm glad you volunteered the information. Two, I'm glad that you've done what you've done, because it's not the time for being proprietary about process, is it?
No, not at all. Not at all. No. We learned so much as a result of it. And actually, I also joined another group called the Risk Leadership Network, a really excellent tool that has been for me. In fact, I've learned a huge amount, and many thanks to the people who set that up. And it was only set up probably a few months into my role. So in June 2019, I think they actually launched this thing called the Risk Leadership Network, which connects risk leaders across different types of industries in different countries. And that was particularly helpful in a COVID scenario, because I was able to talk to people fairly regularly in the UK or in France or in Belgium or wherever they were. And because they had the horrible disadvantage probably of being ahead of us on the COVID curve, they were able to impart a lot of their tips and tricks and how they were, I could learn a lot about what they were doing with their employees and their workplaces, etc. So it was very, very useful.
It just strikes me that that's a very early start that you made there, which is full credit to you for seeing, for seeing the trend coming before I think a lot of people did. But you're talking about, realisation of the issue in December and mobilisation in sort of mid to late January. That's impressive.
Well, I think to be fair, I think that partly I because I was new in the role, because I, as you said earlier, with a legal background, you look for the negatives. I'm very good at identifying any possible risks. I can tell you all the pitfalls of anything. And
the sky is falling.
Indeed. So I was very acutely aware of my responsibilities and wanting to do a good job. And I think because I was new in the role, perhaps that helped me, because I was particularly paranoid about getting it right. And working hard on it, and reaching out to others who I could learn from. And so I think that helped me in being proactive in that sense. Yeah.
That's a really interesting story. I'm just trying to digest all that. I want to talk about what the situation looks like now. Certainly in Queensland, it almost feels to a certain extent like it never happened. Not altogether, but just in general interactions with people. I think the general anxiety day to day of being in a public place with people seems to have resided a little bit, which is positive. I get the sense from what you're saying that the feeling is probably quite similar in New South Wales as well. So, what is the outlook now? Like, what are you focusing on now? What are the main priorities? Recognising that health and safety remains number one. Is there a break in the waves, as it were, for you to start making some headway in other areas and push beyond this at all? There is. And in fact, I am going to turn the lights on. Just give me one second. I'm going to wheel across here and flick on a set of lights. Okay, this is live action. Right. Okay. Back. In terms
our video editor is going to. They can take that bit out.
Won't know what to do with himself.
I made that really hard for somebody. Anyway, it's probably better that you have vision. Not that I necessarily want anyone to have any vision of me whatsoever. I can't bear the thought of it. However, better the lights than no lights. In terms of
there are tens of people who are going to see the YouTube version of this, Jacqui. You're
Great. Now, in terms of what we're
focusing
on now, yes, there is a bit of a break in the waves that you say. At the moment, I think people are feeling relatively comfortable, albeit I am never completely comfortable, and it's not gone away. It's very clear that the virus remains, and there hasn't been a complete eradication of it by any means in Australia. So I think there is still great risk, particularly over this summer period. And I've got one son who's up in Byron Bay at the moment celebrating the end of his HSC.
Right.
And other than the drive to and from Byron Bay from Sydney, which terrifies me, my second biggest worry, or perhaps my first, depends on what day you ask me, is COVID. It's around. And so, yes, we still have to be vigilant, and we've got a way to go. And even once that vaccine gets rolled out, I think we will still, in fact, have some time before we can rest easy in relation to it. So that will be on our risk radar for quite some time to come. But other risks that we have, so we have a key risk dashboard like most organisations do, and we update that on a very regular basis. In fact, COVID has been a fantastic prompt for us to make that a much more active document. So we, when COVID began, we basically redid our key risk dashboard from top to bottom. And I think we've now ended up with a far more relevant document, which is getting a lot more attention than it used to. It used to be reviewed quarterly, and that was fine and probably adequate. But now I think the environment has shifted so much, and it's so dynamic that I don't think we can afford to have it reviewed as infrequently as that. And throughout the worst of the crisis, we were looking at it as a leadership team on a monthly basis. And we had put all of our key risks onto a heat map, and we've been moving them around as the environment that we're working in has been moving around as well. But some of those risks that are there for most large property companies, including GPT, things like terrorism, things like climate change, they remain as very key risks for us, and we are very focused on them in the background. Probably not as publicly as we are on COVID, but
yes.
Yeah.
And how do you avoid? I give you some notes about what I'm going to ask ahead of time, and I was trying to think of a way to say this that was politically correct, but I might in fact say what I didn't say that I was going to say. How do you avoid the copy and paste the last report dynamic of risk analysis? And I have a similar question to valuations, actually. Particularly when they're done very frequently. How do you get clear headspace to look objectively at the risks for an organisation when you are coming back to that list on such a regular basis?
It's amazing how much it has moved and how much focus that list has had since the beginning of COVID in particular. To the point where the board, the Sustainability and Risk Committee, and the leadership team will debate the use of one word over another in there. And it's fantastic and very gratifying. And the one thing that I've had to get used to, and I guess this partly comes from being a lawyer, I want to give them a perfect document. So I have had to learn, and I know this, and most of us know this instinctively, that you're not expected to give all the answers. Just because I'm the chief risk officer doesn't mean I'm going to know or understand all of the risks and identify everything correctly and have the perfect mitigation strategies in place. That's not the case. But my role is to be aware and to keep abreast of the changing environment, to understand what big risks are out there that other people may not have the time or space to be thinking about, to put those on the table. And then it becomes a discussion. It becomes a discussion about what do those risks really mean for GPT, and how should we be responding to them? How critical are they to our business? And so that's what we do. And that might mean that the way I have framed the particular risk gets changed, and that's a good thing. So there's a lot of focus.
It's setting the table for the discussion being a more important thing than setting the table perfectly, I suppose.
Yes.
It's engaging all of these, these great minds with experience and expertise in different areas to focus on a range of different things that you're setting out in a way that can facilitate that discussion without necessarily looking going, Jacqui, that's brilliant, tick.
Yeah.
You get far more value and leverage, I imagine, out of that decision.
You absolutely do. And it is such an interesting environment that we're in at the moment. As I've read on many occasions, we're in this liminal time where we are living the change right now. We're in this shift. We're in this little gully in between two very different things. And we can't yet see with clarity where we're heading in that regard. But there is no question that there is going to be a significant shift in the way we work as a society. And so what does that mean for the owner of very large and very valuable office assets in Australia? And how do we have to respond to that? And similarly in retail, there's been this great acceleration of online shopping, which we knew, and that was a trend well before COVID, but that's been brought forward as well. So what does that mean for us? But those things then have flow-on risks as well, and that work, shift in how we work is also potentially a threat to the culture of an organisation. If all your people are not coming in every day and you're not having that same collaborative interaction that you may once have had, what does that mean for the culture of GPT? Who are you into the future, and how much does it matter? So there's some really, really fascinating issues that we're thinking about and grappling with.
What's your personal view, and you can share it or not, I'll share mine, but you first. What's your personal view on whether a lot of the doomsday talk about the negative impact on office and on the office and retail sectors, to what extent do you think that's on the mark or perhaps a bit overstated? A bit of a leading question, I think, by the way.
Yes,
I asked, you can tell what I think.
You have, but from a retail perspective, I think online definitely will be accelerated. There are a lot of people who've been introduced to online shopping who maybe have never done that before, and who are finding it very convenient and useful for whatever reason. So that'll take off, and we always knew that was going to happen. But if Victoria is anything to go by, so that ever since we've been able to open all of our retail stores in all of our shopping centres in Victoria over the last week or so, the trade down there has been extraordinary. Obviously, there's pent-up demand as well, but the number of people who have flocked back to retail shopping centres in Victoria, and similarly, say in New South Wales, after the lockdown, we saw the same thing. And New South Wales, we now are able to see that really hasn't abated since our shops have been able to reopen. So, yes, I think there's something in retail to the online story for sure, and we're going to have to learn how to deal with that. And our retailers are themselves adjusting to that and becoming multi-channel, omni-channel retailers.
I just make a comment on that. Yeah. I think there's, when you look at a lot of the trends, and one of the things that I think about is the, perhaps figuratively the flattening of the CBD to a certain extent, where there might be more office work pushed out to the suburbs than there has been previously. The large retail centres, these major centres, they're community hubs. So I can see that whilst they might transform into a different format or mix, I think that in the medium to long term, they're going to be stronger on account of that trend.
I think so too. I can't see how it would be otherwise unless people decide they don't want to actually shop in a supermarket anymore and they'll do all of that online. But I don't know. I can't see that happening. I think they are community centres. And I think essentially that's right. We are social beings. And in terms of office, people, when we reopened on the 9th of June, we did that earlier than a lot of other large companies in Sydney. And we had a surprising take-up. There have been a good number of people back in our offices and happy to be here since the start. And we have made it completely optional at all times, as in fact we're required to do under the public health order here in New South Wales. Employers can't require their employees to work in an office if it's reasonably practical for them to work at home. And so that's what we've done. But I think that it will change. People will probably want to work flexibly more often than they have in the past. I think that that's almost inevitable. Now that a lot of people have had a taste of it.
Fridays.
Exactly. Mondays and Fridays, for example. But and we're going to have to think as an organisation about how we grapple with that too, because we can't have all of our people at home on Mondays and Fridays and then everybody in here on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because of the limited number of seats available. We've always actually operated with fewer desks than employees in our offices, because so many of our people do work flexibly and did coming into COVID, and are out on site a lot of the time anyway. But yeah, it will definitely impact office going forward. Very hard to say how, but it's certainly not the death of an office. No way. That's my view.
Yeah. No, look, I agree. I think it's going to look different, but I don't think it's as bad as some people are making out. So very interesting times there. I had a whole lot of other questions here, but I'm conscious of time, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your career path in a broader sense. And I want to do that because I think the things that you've done, a lot of people would look up to in the sense of having, one, made the transition that you've made, and as somebody who has spent a reasonable amount of time working in-house role in a similar organisation to GPT, and initially wanting to go and transition into another part of the business, then deciding that's not what I wanted to do, and knowing a lot of people who go with those aspirations. You've done it, and you've done it successfully. So I think I'm keen to hear about your path in a broader sense. And you've also had, as you'd shared with me, time where because of responsibilities of family, you haven't been able to put the foot down to the extent that you might otherwise have, and now you've got the opportunity to do that. So with that backdrop, I'm just keen to understand perhaps perhaps we could start with, how have your aspirations changed? What did you think you wanted to do when you started being a lawyer, and how has that changed through the different sort of periods of your career to date?
I started at Blake Dawson Waldron in, I think it was 1992, 93, as a summer clerk when I was at university. They're now Ashurst, of course. I know the reference. You're in good company here. And if you had asked me then, I probably very unimaginatively would have told you that I wanted to be a partner there, because that was the path. And I had gone to uni and I had the law degree, and that was what most people did. And I would have been perfectly happy with that, to tell you the truth. But an opportunity came up for me early on in my career to move to land lease, and I took that. And that was a bit of a leap of faith, but
How did that come about? When you say an opportunity came up, you were doing work for them and they said, "Hey, Jacqui, how about coming over?"
No, it was quite odd. Anyway, I got a call from a recruiter when I was at Blake's, and I said no. It's ridiculous. I'm not going anywhere. I'm very happy here. And I was very happy there. I was very happy. I enjoyed my job a lot.
That's a good first response.
I said, no, go away. And anyway, bizarrely, both my husband and another friend, quite independently, told me about an ad they had seen in the Fin Review for an in-house legal role at Lendlease, and the description of the skill set and the area, types of work, was exactly what I was interested in and what I enjoyed doing. And they said, "Gosh, that sounds like you." And I thought, well, that's odd. And then I now didn't think much more about it. But then the recruiter called back again. And I thought, well, there's the hand of God. This is fate talking to me. Maybe I should go along and find out. So I trotted along to 3 interviews, all of them thinking, what am I doing? This total waste of my time. I should be back in the office doing other things. And that probably influenced how nonchalant and I answered the questions in a very relaxed fashion. Anyway, I got offered the job and I took it. And it was, for me, the first time, I think, that I really stepped outside my comfort zone, and I took an opportunity that came along. And if I can offer any advice to anybody who listens to this, that is the one thing that I think people should do. When an opportunity comes, you should just take it. And not all opportunities will work out brilliantly, but you won't know unless you give it a go. And in my case, I have been so thrilled each time I have pushed myself and taken a chance, and people have taken a chance on me. And I think it's improved my...
I think they're linked.
Well, but it has increased my confidence. So each time you do it, you get a little bit better at doing it. And each time, I wasn't endowed with huge amounts of self-confidence, believe me. And so I didn't think I could do it. But luckily, my husband and other people who've supported me throughout said, of course you can. Don't be stupid. Give it a go. What have you got to lose? And so I have each time. And it's been great. And I, similarly a few years ago, took the Deputy General Counsel role when that came up. But because I've got 4 children and my husband has a demanding job, we made a decision a long time ago that and I made the decision actually with his support, that I was prepared to and wanted to focus on our family for a period of time. And I very much did that. So I have worked 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. I have worked in a job share arrangement for 8 years. I've done every form of flexible work known to mankind, I think, every arrangement, every day of the week. And so
no stone left unturned.
No, I've tried Mondays and Fridays and Thursdays and 3 days in a row and 2 days at either end. I've done it all.
And people still call you on the days when you're off.
And people always did. But actually, that's a very key point, because one of my team mentioned to someone the other day that I'm not in the office on Friday and that I'm not supposed to work on Friday. I don't think it's ever Friday. I haven't worked, but anyway. And this fella nearly dropped dead. And I've worked with him for 20 years, and he said, she doesn't work on a Friday? But he said, I've had so many meetings with her on a Friday. And I think that's very important, that I have been very flexible with GPT. I have accommodated them and they have accommodated me. And it has been a mutually beneficial arrangement, and I have demonstrated that I can be trusted, and therefore they have given me that trust in response. So it's a two-way street, very much a two-way street, and I have never set firm boundaries around when I will or won't work. I have just done what needs to be done, and I have, on the whole, been happy with that arrangement. But yeah, when the CRO role came up, again, I thought, well, I don't know if is this a good thing to do? But then I thought, well, what the heck? Here we go. Give it a go.
Well, I mean, as I've shared with you when we've spoken previously, I think that to successfully make that transition is rare from what I've seen. So full credit to you for doing that. Full credit to GPT as well, I think, for backing you into that role, because I think a lot of organisations take a view on the legal skill set and the legal mindset. Of course, you've proven yourself over many years there, but I think that's a great story, and I hope we see more of that. 2 questions, or one question before the standard last question that I ask. What would you say? What would you say to people coming into the profession now, if they're asking for advice, if somebody at law school or someone about to graduate is asking for advice about the path they should take or the things they should be doing, given how different the profession looks when each of you and I would have started? What do you tell people now?
I can't. It's interesting because some of my sons are now 23, 21, 18 and 15. And so I am being asked that question from time to time. And
are they studying? Are they aspiring?
No, none of them will touch it with a 10-foot pole. No, I've got electrical engineering. I've got a software engineer. One of them is going to start with Atlassian soon. So no, not at all. So it's a vastly different set of skills they've got. But they can all debate. I'll tell you what. But when I talk with them and their friends, the best I can say is really keep an open mind. I think a law degree gives you an amazing grounding for so many. You can jump in so many different directions now. My husband, who's actually a politician, was formerly a lawyer. But there are so many people who I meet in public life, and actually through my husband, who have law degrees and who have ended up in weird and wonderful places doing all sorts of things. Don't close your mind to the opportunities that are available to you. And of course, if you want to be a partner in a law firm, and there are people who want to be partners in law firms, that's a great thing too. So don't shy away from that either, or a barrister for that matter. But you can take it in so many different directions, and just keep your mind open to all of the things that are available.
I think that's excellent advice. Last question, Jacqui, I ask what people's current obsession is. It's just trying to get an insight into something that you do outside of work and family that might surprise people. Do you have anything that fits the bill there? I
love to read.
So the Netflix show you're binging, perhaps?
No, I like The Crown. Love to read. That wouldn't surprise anyone, I don't think. But my lifelong obsession is French, and all things French. And I speak French, and I have a French tutor who comes to the house once a week when I don't cancel her for work reasons. But I am absolutely obsessive. I listen to the French news on SBS. I have there's a colleague here in the office who I accost whenever I can because she's French, and we speak French together. That is a passion that has never waned. It's like going on a holiday in my head every time I speak French. It's wonderful. So.
And do you get, outside of the last 12 months, do you get over to France much to use that?
Luckily for me, my best friend from school married a Frenchman. It was meant to be me,
well
but second best thing, it was her. And so she lives over there. No, don't send that to Jonathan. But she lives in Paris, and in fact, she works for Austrade at the moment. She's in London currently. She was to a role there recently, and they moved over in January. Bad timing. But anyway, she is most of her life in Paris, and she's got 3 sons, one of whom I am godmother to. So I always say that I have responsibilities in France. There are things I need to do over there.
You'd be a bad godmother
I
if
would
you didn't
be.
go
I would be
there.
derelict not to be travelling there frequently. So yes, that is my obsession.
That's wonderful. Jacqui, I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alistair. It's been a pleasure.
That was Jacqui O'Dea, Chief Risk Officer of GPT Group, and I am Alistair Fitzgerald, CEO of Field. We are the leading solution in the Australian market for lease portfolio due diligence. If you are buying or selling commercial real estate assets, or a tenant looking to better understand and leverage its lease portfolio, or involved in transaction advisory involving large quantities of leases, let us turn your leases into action. Find out more at fieldql.com. Thanks again for listening. Catch you on the next episode.